like to introduce today's presenters from the Ashley Furniture team, Optimization Manager Matt Sparks and Data Analyst Rachel Vanderbilt. Welcome, Matt. And
hey, how's it going? Thanks for having us.
Hello.
Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. Rachel and I will take you through a feature we have called Slider for the last year. It's definitely made its rounds around Ashley and has become known by many other words that we won't go over, but its long and arduous journey has been made up of 4 iterations, 2 user studies, countless meetings with stakeholders to arrive at what we've now can confidently say has been our biggest win in the testing and optimization team to date. So with that, we'll go ahead and start our slides here. Yeah, we'll go ahead and take you through our team and our process first and kind of how we arrived at this, just so you have some backstory to us. So our team's currently comprised of myself as the UX optimization manager. Rachel's our data analyst. At the time of this, we had 2 developers, Chris Graves and Vishal. We had our 2 UX researchers, Jury and Ken, that are part of the team, and our architect, Randy. The process of which we use to get this, which is the team workflow, is we take test ingestion. We do this a couple ways. When Slider first started, we kind of came up with it based on some ideas, but really realistically how it comes from the ingestion is we come up with ideas, and it can come from stakeholders, it can come from our internal team, it can come from the business branch, which are kind of like our 3 paths into it. Once they funnel ideas in, we set up ideation and workshopping, which happens once a week. So we talk about the ideas, we work through them. We try to be as completely transparent and honest as we can with things that won't work. It just makes our list smaller if we can do that. If they're all great ideas, then they all hit the backlog. But once we do have once we're satisfied with the QA status, we get the results. We get the test launched. Once the test has hit an ample sample size and we're happy with the significance or just the sample size itself that we're seeing, we do the test reporting, and then we iterate from there. Go ahead, Rachel. So from that, Slider test 1 was a combination of a few things. One, the business goal was we wanted a place that didn't clutter the website up. And we had been talking with our vendor at the time who saw something that we had done a very small test on, which is we had a small slide out from the left-hand side of the screen that was promoting financing at the time. And they gave their monthly update and said that this was a really well done and high performing asset to the site in that it uses the slide out functionality, whereas people are still trying to use modals or still trying to use whatever method to convey what it is they're trying to showcase or assets that they're trying to get customers to interact with. So that was like scenario 1. Scenario 2 was we also noted that it was getting cluttered on the site. Quite a few things were always being made to have more assets on there or more promotions, and it just seemed like we were taking up every available space, and we were noticing less engagement with things. So in turn, it was taking away from other things just to have more on the site. So that was kind of it. Rachel, what else do we have in this as a theoretical solution?
So generally, Slider offers the opportunity to allow for people throughout our organization to kind of claim their hold on it. And let's say they have a ton of promotions that they want to put out there. It's a clean solution for presenting those options to customers instead of having web pages with a ton of stuff all over them. So Slider seemed like a really good way to declutter the site while also being kind of a cool feature.
Right. So that was kind of how it was born, and then the development process was just something that started with one of our IT guys, Chris, where we just worked with an architect and we dumped the idea in there like, hey, what if we had one thing that gave users an abundance of tools to use throughout their journey without it really cluttering the site or hindering their journey or taking away from something else. So from that, we hit a whiteboard session for a couple days in a row where we brought in stakeholders and we asked them, hey, what would be important to the site? And the first iteration of Slider was born out of that whiteboarding session, while keeping all the theoretical principles we were trying to hit on active, but we wanted to manage it, the expectation to the other stakeholders, and that this wasn't just like a slide out drawer that you dumped everything in. Like, it needed to have purpose, and it needed to be tools that users could access throughout their entire journey. And actually, eventually, we'd already started talking, future iterations maybe dynamically changing based on the page that they were on. So that has led us into the first iteration of Slider. So the test setup itself, we have this nifty video here for you from Rachel. This is what was born out of our first iteration. So right away, our architect came up with icons that we felt would represent the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sorry, I couldn't remember if it was 7 or 8 in our tabs. So the 8 tabs that we had available. So in talking with all the stakeholders throughout our e-commerce department, we came up with financing, which was something useful for a customer throughout their entire journey. We had deals, which we knew would be something users want to see. We had price drops. The difference between price drops and deals at the time was that price drops were items you could buy right inside the slider. So they're individualized, whereas deals more led you to product you could search through under that specific deal. Featured products was something at the time we were showcasing mattresses because that was a real big deal for us. So it's basically like the one product, if you had to highlight it, what would it be? And that was kind of what featured was. And then we went into trending, which just was what was trending at the time. Rather, if it was a holiday season, we know you could use it for holidays. If it was just regular time of the year, it's just what's the big sellers right now. If it was summertime versus wintertime, it left the door open for some dynamic stuff. But just for this iteration, we just put in what was trending at the time. And then we went on to sweepstakes because, believe it or not, there was actually a lot of call for users wanting to be able to find the sweepstakes where it was running because they'd see them out in Google Ads, wherever it was, and they'd come in looking for it. And we noticed that sweepstakes wasn't always predominantly featured on the site. So we just threw it in here saying like, hey, you could access this at any time. You can actually enter the sweepstakes from the slider itself. And then we had the help icon, which just led you to our help page, and then email/refer a friend, which changes based on whether you're logged in or not, which allows the users to sign up for emails and get 10% off. And then if you sign up for an email, it'll switch over to refer a friend, which is separate, which allows you to refer a friend and get like another percentage off coupon that they send you. So realistically, that was our first iteration of Slider. The design was born out of some stakeholder callouts where we wanted icons, but business wanted text, and we said, well, why not both? So we kind of had this what was referred to as clippy flyout. It really was actually, we all thought it was cool at the time, and business wasn't sure, but our results proved that it was something that that users really engaged with. Rachel, anything to add?
No, that was great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the test that we ran and the results of that test, and then some lessons that we learned from this version of this test. So our first iteration of Slider had 1.5 million users in the test, which is a lot. And it was only users that were utilizing a desktop to access our site, because at the time we didn't have a mobile version of Slider. And this test ran for a total of 2 weeks, and it was over the Black Friday holiday last year. So the last week of November and the first week of December. So to analyze these data, I segmented our variation into 3 groups. So the first group are users who clicked in Slider. The second are users who hovered over Slider. And the third are those that didn't engage with Slider at all. So that third group encompasses the second group. But I'm going to talk a little bit about why I did that. So essentially, Hoverers offers a way to sort of have a clean comparison to the engagement group, because when you look at like that sum total of about 750,000 users who didn't engage with Slider, there's a lot of error in there. There's a lot of reasons why people's financial outcomes might be different in that group of participants. So essentially, the Hover group offered a way for us to control for users that may have just left the site, or it just seemed a little bit cleaner. So here I'm presenting the financial metrics from this test in the percent saw from engagers versus hovers, and engagers versus our control group who didn't see Slider at all. And we have two metrics that we're predominantly interested in here. The first is revenue per user. So this is a metric that calculates a dollar value for every user, regardless of whether they made a purchase, and it is equal to the total dollars spent in a variation or a segment of a variation, and you divide that by the number of users in that variation or segment to achieve that dollar value. And we saw that for that metric, there was a 240% increase from engagers and hovers. So just by clicking in Slider, there was a 240% increase in your value on our website. And compared to the control group who didn't have Slider access at all, we saw a 775% increase in the revenue per user metric for engagers compared to that control group. So pretty astronomical change there. And again, when we control, that 240% increase is still pretty dramatic. And then the second metric that we look at is order confirmation rate. And this is the proportion of users in a variation or a segment of a variation that made a purchase. This is also known as like a macro conversion rate. So you hear that called a number of different things. But for this test, we saw an increase of 164% from hovers to engagers in their likelihood to check out. And from engagers, in comparison to the control group, we saw a 575% increase in that order confirmation rate. So again, we're seeing an increase in people checking out, and also an increase in value per user, regardless of whether they checked out, just by engaging with Slider. So what happened? Well, we got some pushback on this test. Not everyone in our business was convinced by the test outcomes, and you may be looking at that and going, well, why? That seems really clear. And I'll talk you through why we think that might be. And second, there was an issue potentially with the design in that it was perceived to be a little bit intrusive to implement. So you heard Matt call it clippy. It's got this like aggressive kind of, it slides up and it slides out, and all the words they fly out, and it's a lot. And that was probably a fair assessment at the time. And so we went back to the drawing board and we tightened up the control on our test. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we made the second test a little better. So the first thing to note is that experimental control is extremely important when we're running tests. So if we're looking outside of A/B testing, the point of an experiment is to be as controlled as possible, to reduce as much noise as we can to compare the difference between a group or two. And so when we think about A/B testing, it's very hard to do that. And one of the strengths of A/B testing is that we're getting real data. People are really on our website. They're really engaging with our website, and we're getting actual data of users. But one of the detriments is that it is very difficult to control the conditions of that test. Users behave in different ways, and they see different features on the site. And so control is very difficult to achieve in an A/B test. And when we're looking at our first Slider test, one of the issues is that it was run in overlay, which is not inherently bad. There is a time and a place to run a test in overlay. But the concern here is that users were exposed to multiple tests that we were running. I think it could have been 3 or 4 tests at the same time. And so it's difficult to isolate the effects of our experiment of Slider. And so global features like slider ideally should be isolated when possible so that you can avoid the multiple test exposure. However, recognizing that some websites have a difficult time populating their tests. And so if site traffic is an issue, you have two kind of ways you can play with this. First is to control the other tests that people are included in. So you can say, particularly I know in SiteSpec, we've grappled with this a few times. Well, if they're in overlay, they can be exposed to test A, but not test B at the same time as this test. So you can control what other tests people are included in. And you can also, if that is not a possibility, can account for the interaction of test effects in your analyses. And that is something you have to do by downloading your data set and sort of assigning everybody a value based on what tests they were in at the same time and what a test they were exposed to at the same time to make sure that you're controlling for that. So for the secondary test of slider, we didn't run it in overlay. It was run kind of siloed. So no one who was in the slider test was in any other test. Yep. So second is we limited participants. So A/B tests usually rely on a t-test statistic to compare the mean of two groups. And the thing about t-tests is they are easily overpowered by having too many participants. And essentially by overpowered, what I mean is that you can artificially inflate your significance values, which makes them uninterpretable. So when we think about, sometimes people are advised that they should wait for a metric to become significant before they end their test. And you can let a test run for a longer amount of time to generate more traffic to make a metric become significant. And that is a thing that sometimes is advised to do, and it's called p-hacking. So if that's something that you're doing right now, I would advise you to look into p-hacking more and to understand what a statistically significant value is, so that we can avoid doing that. Because what happens is essentially when you overinflate your statistics by overpopulating your test, your significance values are no longer interpretable. They're no longer a reliable way to determine whether your test is a win or not. And so what you have to do is end the test at a predetermined number of participants. And you can determine what that number is by using a sample size calculator made for A/B tests. So that's what we did. We came up with a predetermined number of participants for our second iteration of slider.
Yep.
And then this kind of ties into the idea of generalizability. So this test, first off, was run over Black Friday, like I said, and that's our busiest time of the year, which is no surprise to anyone who's in the e-commerce business. And so we did want to make sure that we looked at the at Slider's performance in a slower period of time, so that we could make the argument that not only was it valuable during our busiest time, but it's also valuable at a mundane time in our business cycle. And so the other thing about generalizability is that when you include too many participants and you artificially inflate your p-values, it means that the findings we found in our first test probably would not hold up in subsequent tests. And if we had decided to not retest Slider, and we had decided to hard code that to our site as a permanent site feature, we most likely would not find the same results in tracking that feature over time. And that probably causes some friction in the business if you do stuff like that, because you say, hey, I expect you to make X amount of dollars and you're not making X amount of dollars. That's frustrating. So recognizing that that is why you don't put too many participants in your test. So we also wanted to test a new design for Slider. So as we said, it was called Clippy. And so Matt, if you want to talk a little bit about, if you want to talk about the new version of Slider. If I can get this to play.
There it is. So once my team kind of came on board, because we were kind of a skeleton crew for the first iteration, this is one of the first things we did. Instead of easing the team in to see if they could walk before they could crawl, we kind of threw them off a cliff to see if they could fly. Because this was, for some of them, including my architect, Randy, was the first thing that they did, which was the second version of Slider. And what we came up with was, from a front-facing design, we wanted something that almost mimicked more of an app. excuse me, more of an app type feel. So he came up with this version, which is really cool. It has like a slight hover when you're, or a slight wiggle once you hover over any of the icons. The categories stayed the same. We didn't want to change those yet, but we changed a few things to be more dynamic, such as refer a friend and email like before, but then we also changed financing, and price drops has like the ability to add within the slider itself without having to go anywhere, making it more useful. So in this iteration, as we were pitching it to business, we cleaned up the design, we made it less aggressive, and we kept the same same categories as before. We updated it with newer content if the category managers or the stakeholders of the tab wanted something updated. We went ahead and got it caught up. But one thing we did do that we thought was awesome in here, and I'm not sure if it's on your slide, Rachel, but we also added what we were calling a Crundles tab, which served as an upsell cross-sell. So on any given page, when a user clicked add to cart, which signified that there was an intent to buy it either now or at a later time, there would be a hidden slide that came out that said for you, I believe was the text on it, and that offered upsellable or cross-category sellable items that were specifically made for cross-sell upsell on the item that you're adding the cart or adding it to cart on. So that was pretty cool, and business really liked that idea. It gave our merchandisers and marketing team a way to finally kind of upsell cross-sell because they've been looking for that way. So again, that's what we did, and as we pitched it to business, it's like, this is your all-in-one shop. Like, we don't want it to replace things on the site in terms of like, oh, you just throw it all inside a slider. We just wanted to be able to clean up the site and say you don't need things, you know, everywhere when you can put them in slider. And especially, we've now given you 8 tabs, some of them dynamically changing, that already take care of things that you were otherwise trying to find instances for or workarounds for, or just develop so that you have. Well, they already exist to an extent inside slider, or can be amended to be inside slider. And that's what really got business going with the second version. So they're excited to see the results, and that's what we did, was fire this test up.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about the next iteration of slider. So we had about 100,000 users in this test, which is a dramatic difference from that first test that had 1.5 million users in it. And again, desktop only. We didn't yet have a mobile version of slider. And this test was run over the course of 3 weeks. And it was siloed. So again, users could only be in this test and in no others. So segmentation for this test. We had 2 variations that a user could be in, or the control. And slider 2.3 was the one you originally saw that was clippy. And slider 3.0 was this new updated one that we just saw. And you can kind of see here that users who clicked in slider 2.3, that was about 8% of users in that variation. Whereas for slider 3.0, our updated slider, 10.2% of users in that variation clicked on slider. So we saw an increase in engagement with that new version of slider. And again, we saw an increase compared to the control for both versions of slider. And again, important to note, it may look like on the face that slider 2.3 has better numbers here, but something to keep in mind is that fewer users engaged with slider 2.3, so the monetary values that we achieved were a little bit more volatile. So it's important that we take into consideration the whole package of information that we have when we make a winning decision. And for slider 3.0, not only did we see a substantial increase in the dollar value per user and the order confirmation rate and the engagement rate with slider as a whole, but each individual piece of slider also performed better in slider 3.0 compared to slider 2.3. So slider 3.0 ultimately was a bigger success than was slider 2.3. And again, even though we had 2 tests now, one that was highly controlled and one that was during Black Friday that had astronomical increases, we still got pushback on these test results. And the pushback we received this time was, well, this is only on desktop, and you know, mobile is the wave of the future. We need to get mobile data before we commit to slider. And the second thing that we got pushback on was that there is some concern about whether Slider is actually the mechanism causing the increase in sales and revenue, which is probably a pretty reasonable concern to have. So to sort of assess this, we did a simultaneous qualitative testing regimen on Slider, engaging in some usability tests, excuse me. So using SiteSpec's preview link, we were able to have users engage with Slider and talk a little bit about what they were experiencing. And so in one of the tests I conducted, I gave half of users a prompt to identify a specific product and to look for it on our website. The other half of users received a prompt to just browse our site and look at the things that we offered. And I had them, find a product or browse the website and just listen to the kind of feedback they were giving us on our website. And what was interesting is that the people who were instructed to browse were much more drawn to the Slider feature than were the people I dubbed the motivated buyer, the people that had an idea of what they wanted when they came to our website. And browsers were also more likely to indicate that engagement with Slider would ultimately push them to make a purchase that they otherwise might not have. So this kind of feedback was really important to us to say, we can't really prove causality necessarily, but here are some qualitative data with users telling us that engagement with Slider fundamentally would push them to make a purchase they otherwise might not have. And that should be some indication that Slider is working for those users. And so this was a really great package of data to be able to present back to stakeholders. And so something that kind of was born out of some of this feedback we were getting and frustration about, not being able to get people excited about what we were doing is that we started holding direct report out meetings with stakeholders to discuss the results of our tests one-on-one with the people who might benefit from it. And something interesting is that as you report out on tests, you start discussing recommendations for the future, including future test directions or things that you can implement on the site to solve their issues. And it was important that we would indicate whether Slider would be an elegant solution to the problems they were facing when it would be. And the other thing we were able to do is also when we were approached with a new feature that we knew we had already accounted for in Slider, we would be able to say, hey, have we ever shown you Slider? It would really, we already kind of have that feature in there. And you kind of get people across the business excited about Slider and about the possibilities it offers to them and their piece of the website, whatever that is.
Yep.
So Matt, if you want to talk about kind of how we're moving forward with Slider.
So future direction of Slider is the mobile piece, which we are currently developing. It is actually almost done. It's really cool. And this gives us total coverage between mobile users and desktop users and everything in between. We are becoming a mobile first company since the majority of our traffic is now mobile. As much as the desktop does have purchasers, whereas mobile is browsers, it's detrimental to us to account for mobile. And we knew that from the beginning. We're trying to do this piece by piece, mobile being the last piece of the complete journey of Slider. So we're really excited to get that tested here in the next few weeks. Should be ready for our stakeholders to look at. The other thing we're doing more of that we pitched to business is that since Slider is pretty much ready to go on the desktop and now finally has all the blessings it needs to make it into development and get deployed to our site, that we're building it in such a way that dynamic page content can be implemented in Slider. So based on what page you're on, you may get little indicators that show up on there. They're badges, basically, little circles that say 1 in them or 2 or whatever the number is, indicating a change in the Slider tab so that a user can engage with it and see new content or more pertinent content that was not so generic before reaching a certain page. And then finally, we're just continuing the momentum of everything Slider and moving everything towards that that build so that way, like Rachel said, it can be accounted for going forward. Like it's scalable no matter what redesign comes. It doesn't matter. Slider can move with it. Slider can scale. Slider can descale. It can do a lot of different things, and then it can hold for the future iterations of the site things that may come up in the future that business wants to include, and we can say, hey, that's a great thing for Slider, or no, it's not, and vice versa. And then that way, it's always continuing to evolve without needing to kind of do a whole website overhaul. And that's it. Anything else from you, Rachel?
That was all for me. Does anyone have any questions?
Thank you guys so much for the great presentation. So again, as they said, we have time for some Q&A. So if you have a question, please go ahead and type it into your question panel, and we'll do our best to get to all of them. But we've got a first question here. Since increased traffic can cause overinflated values, would you say e-commerce brands shouldn't run new tests during peak times like Black Friday? I know that was an initial source of info for you guys. What's your general kind of advice about that?
That is an outstanding question. So no, I definitely wouldn't say that at all. It's actually really important to understand how key features perform at a variety of time points in the business cycle. And that includes busy times and down times. But it's important to note that the time in which you're running a test does impact the results that you're seeing. So as long as you're aware of your peak times and the fact that you're running a test either during a very busy time or a very slow time, and you can account for that, that's what's important. And also remembering that you should be probably redoing tests over time, and you should never like leave a test forever and never rerun it, because you do want to make sure, again, that as your site changes and your customer base changes and as the seasons change, that you are making sure that all your content still functions in the way you'd like it to over time.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you hit on it, Rachel, in the presentation, but I know you did for Black Friday. The first variation went, but the second variation went during a very slow time in Ashley's business cycle.
Yeah, it was super slow. And it was also for this year, the second iteration of Slider was like right at the beginning of COVID, and people were anxious and concerned and not shopping and not spending money. And that definitely had an impact on our second test, even though, again, we're telling you we saw these massive increases in all of the different financial metrics we cared about. It also was probably the slowest period we will ever have. And so, that probably was a good comparison point. But yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Our next question here is, what were the guiding factors to decide what to include in the slider? Was it to reduce navigation? And then the second part of the question is, I also missed how users activate/access the slider, if you don't mind reviewing that a little bit.
Sure. So what to include was a very long process, and we knew in time it could change. So we put up on our whiteboarding session what we wanted, and it was massive because we had to include stakeholders from all the different categories. So our marketing team was in there, our social team was in there, our merchandising team was in there. Our IT devs were in there to make sure we could do what we wanted, because that could play a factor in it too. It's like, hey, I want this, but it's not really doable under these certain circumstances. So we wanted to be able to say, great idea, or yeah, would love to, but it's not feasible right now. So we kind of put everybody in the room over a couple of weeks off and on, and we said, what's most important? So the first one that business could agree on was financing. Financing hits on so many different things for marketing, for merchandising, for the financing team themselves, and the fact that it's a tool that you could bring with you to any page and it has relevance. So it doesn't matter where you are on the site, financing, both just knowing what your options are, knowing that you could log into your financial account if you're already a member, things like that. We knew we wanted that in there. And the biggest thing that once the future iterations came along was that you could actually apply for our Ashley credit card right then and there in Slider. which would have an outcome, help you have an outcome on your journey throughout the site. So financing was almost like a no-brainer. We knew that that was what we wanted. The second one was deals. We came across that for a couple of reasons. One, as your question kind of is, was to reduce some of the navigation. So deals with the merchandising team and marketing team are all over our site. That's one of the ones where it's like everybody wants to have their stake on the site. So every team of the e-commerce department was like, well, I want something here, and I want something here, and I want something here. Well, that led to clutter, or that leads to larger page scrolls, what have you. It led to quite a few things, just messy, and people leading to frustration would exit the site because there's just too much in there, or the wrong content is on the wrong site when they were coming into the site. So to make it easy, we said, hey, let's take all your deals that you want to have all these spots for, get rid of some of the spots, and put them inside Slider. And that way, users have access to them at any point throughout their journey, and it covers everybody's deals that they want to have in one neat place. So that was agreeable. All the stakeholders agreed. The third at the time was called price drops. And we wanted this because we wanted some items that users could buy right then and there in Slider throughout their journey. So we used pretty much the hottest products that came out of our merchandising team, and we said, hey, if we put these as like a little grid card tile inside of Slider, there's about 3 or 4 of them we could fit in there. Let's just have them be able to purchase it right then and there from Slider without even having to go anywhere. So it didn't take them out of their current journey if they were doing something, but a user could open it up and then add one of those products to cart right within the slide out. So that was really cool, and everybody agreed on that. Sweepstakes was another one that we did. That was a no-brainer because we just didn't have like a lot of like obvious ways to get to sweepstakes on our site. It was usually you came in through a social channel or social advertisement. But what about your organic shoppers? What about the people that just come to the site but are still interested in sweepstakes? Well, this solved for that because you could you could slide it out, see the sweepstakes, and enter the sweepstakes right within the slide out itself. So it didn't matter where you were. There was at the time of testing, we had the trending tab, which we were supposed to add a social. After the first iteration, we wanted to add a social element too, but realistically, it was just what our merchandising team said was the most trending product on the site, and it wasn't an individual product. It was just a link to those that which are trending on the site. But that went through a whole facelift in this last iteration that we're working on for the future, that the mobile version will have and our last version of desktop will have. It actually has those trending elements from social that tell you what's most trending actually on social, and then allows you to go to those products pages to buy. The other one that we had was help, which was agreed upon instantly and actually demanded by business. So we have our Ask Ashley page, which houses all of the possible things you could need for help. Tracking order, questions, phone numbers, finding a store, things like that. So all that was a static slide out that led you to that landing page where you could choose the type of help that you needed. And then we had the email one. Email signups are real big in Ashley, or they're big for any e-commerce site. So we wanted a place to give our email team the ability to let users sign up for the email and get 10% off anywhere on the site. So keeping that in mind, understand that the slide out is a tool base that follows a user anywhere they go. It's supposed to be there to help them access things easily without having to go search for them. And then our last tab that we've just updated and was in that last iteration was our chat. We integrated a third-party chat system, and it kind of floats all over the place or has like expanding bubbles. And we found that that was kind of a little bit intrusive to our customers. And we were like, why not just add it as a tab to slide out? So we did. So you could just click it, and your total chat interaction actually just happens within the confines of the slide out itself. So that was what it was. So yeah, to reduce navigation, to clean up, to give users access to these tools without having to go search for them or get on the chat or go find a number to call customer care to get their answers. We kind of wanted them to have that access all the way up into the cart page, all at their fingertips. And then Rachel, do you have the preview link up that you can show? Because I'd love to show how it looks and how it was the access, because the second part of the question is how did they activate or access the slider?
That's a really good question. I don't even know if I can share my screen. So let me see if I can do that. But no, I did not have it up.
Because I have it up if you
Oh, okay. If you have it up, that would be great.
I can stop sharing my screen so you guys can go ahead and share your screens if that works.
Sure,
That
just
would be
show them real
outstanding.
quick to answer that, because it's I got it up already.
Sure.
Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so to answer that question, when you come to the site, first thing you hit is the home page, or from wherever you're coming in. It didn't actually matter because this is present on every single page up to the cart page in the checkout funnel. It dropped off after that. So as you can see over here on the right, where I'm circling with my mouse, we had the actual slider here. This is it in its first state. This is how it loads. So all you'd have to do is click on a tab. It would slide out. You could interact with all the features within each tab. If you went straight to another tab, it would just change. This is where we have individual price dropped items that you could add straight to your cart. If you clicked add to cart, it would just change within the button to give the notification that it was added, and then go back to add to cart in case a user wanted to add another one. Trending was just, like I said at the time, a static link to all the trending items. Our sweepstakes was here. You could enter within the actual slide out itself. Our help tab, this one was the one that just led to our landing page full of help options. Refer a friend and email are dynamic. So if you're logged in, it would be refer a friend. If you're logged out, it would just say email, in which case you could enter your email to receive a 10% off coupon. Then the refer a friend one would show up. If you already did the email one, it would change to this dynamically, and you'd be able to do this in the same session. And then the last one was our chat button, which just loads the chat inside of here and allows you to do sales and service. And then you could click outside of it and it'd close it.
And that exists on every page. So you don't have to do anything to activate it on desktop. But on mobile, there'll be like a little icon in the bottom corner of your screen to make slider come up.
Right.
Awesome, thank you. Question here is, what is your favorite thing about SiteSpec over your previous vendor and why?
So a lot. So we had SiteSpec before as a potential candidate when we were with AB Tasty, which was our last vendor. We really enjoyed SiteSpec's ability to sit in the data layer where they deliver the changes that are being made without any flicker. That's definitely one of the SiteSpec's claim to fame. But what we were really, really, really impressed with was the data. So the way that SiteSpec reports out data from sitting in the data layer is awesome. I mean, it's so detailed and gives us so much to segment and use from. That's really it, because to be honest, the transition from AB Tasty to SiteSpec is not an easy one if you depend on the visual editor. Because once we got over to SiteSpec, even though they do have their own visual editor, it just becomes something where the team just organically became better and better at coding their results or looking at the page source and finding a search and replace option. So that was something that, and at the time we also had a developer, Chris, who was on our team, and this would definitely be the preferred method if you have any developer than using the WYSIWYG. It's just, you can do a lot more. So that was kind of like our big draw and our big stand for them was the data, the search and replace, and sitting in the data layer with no flicker. Those were like, at least for me and when I was there, when I had the team going the first time around. And I think when the rest of my team came on board, all saw the benefit in that. Rachel, anything you want to add?
Yeah, the data is so clean, y'all. If you're like concerned about the quality, like your data quality, that's the best part of SiteSpec is their data is clean. And and also just like they have a really great staff there as well. And whenever there's something that we're not really sure how to do, or like we have like a dream scenario, like there's something we want to measure and just cannot figure out how to do it, or we have some complex test we want to set up, the team there is so wonderful at walking us through everything we need to know to make it happen. And if they don't know, they have like their team figure it out to help us, because we run some stuff that that can be tough to set up sometimes. So that's also been really wonderful.
Sometimes.
We always have stuff that's really hard to set up.
We have graduated to always hard to set up. So yeah,
It's always hard.
Paul and Andrew, our developer, have been awesome. I'm sure they have some nightmares about us because we send some tough projects their way, but they're always there to deliver. So yeah, good call out, Rachel. They're awesome. Their support staff's just amazing.
Outstanding, honestly.
Great. So we'll move on to the next question. Do you think there's a limit to the amount of functionality you can put into the slider?
Yes. So just like your website can get really cluttered and overwhelming, slider sure can. And there's like, every time we talk to someone, there's some new thing they want to throw in there. And at some point you have to say, well, we really do, once it's hard coded, need to test like how many tabs we have, and whether it's just is too much. And that is a question you need to take into consideration. So yes, there definitely is a limit to the amount of functionality you can put in slider at any one time. But it is interesting and dynamic and easily modifiable. And those are, the cool kind of things about it.
Yeah, for us, our slider was built to be modular, so you can swap in and out tabs really easily. So like when we have holidays come on, we'll probably have a holiday tab that'll take the place of sweepstakes or trending, probably just for the holiday, and then go back. There's also been an instance where if a tab goes down, maybe for either technical reasons or the fact that business is like, I do not want this and I don't want any subsequent ones behind it, it'll just collapse on itself and it'll just recenter itself in the middle with 7 tabs instead of 8 or 6 or 5. It doesn't matter what it is. It'll just keep recollapsing itself and center itself in the screen. Our developer did an awesome job of assuring that that's what would happen, just in case the future state comes up where we need less. We picked 8 tabs at the time to start with because we were all over the place. When you ask stakeholders how many tabs they want, the answer is 1,000 or 2,000. Or you know what? Can I put the whole screen as a tab? You're going to get people that just want more is more. So we had to be strategic in making sure that enough tools were there, both from like a content standpoint and just from like things that aren't being shown or easily accessible to users. And we see that there's high engagement. So like the sweeps tab was put in there, sweepstakes tab. There are a lot of people who engage with sweeps when they are on that page. The question was, how can we better get people to that page? Well, we could put more stuff up, like a banner or an advertisement or a link, but merchandising and marketing didn't want to use that real estate for that necessarily. So we put it in slider and we had huge engagement. It was the biggest place that people did sweepstakes from. But we also knew that there could come times where they wanted to swap it out. And like I said, that's why it was made modular. It can be swapped out very easily with something else. But we put the limit ourselves from this team internally at 8, just because it was the sweet spot in getting enough on there without it being overwhelming and scalable. So as you go to different screen sizes, it still stays nice and neat in the middle, and doesn't get crunched or doesn't get stretched or anything. It was just the sweet spot. It's a good test we've always talked about too for future iterations of like, hey, maybe we should try 10, maybe we should try 4, to re-optimize. And that's the great thing about doing this type of work, is that you're always optimizing even when it's your own stuff.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. Hopefully we'll get to them all, but the next one is, did all of the tests have the same level of confidence in the conclusion?
No. So yeah, this is a good question. So the first test, I came in and I was handed a pile of tests that had been run and was like, analyze these, figure out what's going on here, just get your feet under you and, what do you have to say about these? And the one thing about the first test was it was so overpowered that it was hard to draw meaningful conclusions from that data set, other than to say it looks like it's trending in the right direction. And I do believe, you know, we have some evidence to say that Slider probably is beneficial to our site and the financial outcomes we're interested in. But we have to retest because I'm not at all confident in these results. And the second test, again, there are pros and cons to the decisions we made and we've learned from this test. I'm fairly confident in that test outcome. I think, again, that test was run at a time where we almost did it a disservice. We couldn't have possibly known that COVID was going to happen at the time we started developing the second version. And I think our third version, forever, it was so many versions. So that third version that I think we almost like, there are results that tell us there's probably a positive outcome there, and I feel pretty good about it, but I bet it would have been better had COVID not been a consideration at that time. And if we were in it now, there are other barriers to preventing us from getting a totally accurate picture right now. In a year from now, I would hope that we could probably get some clean data, but the way that the world is right now, we probably won't have an accurate picture of Slider anytime soon. So I'm fairly confident in that second set of analyses, in that second or third test, the last one we talked about, because I think we controlled the test pretty well and managed to get some really clean quality data there.
Awesome, thanks. Our next question is, were you able to determine which tiles were engaged with the most, and is that influencing future design? Or are you launching it as you test it? I think this sort of speaks to what you were talking about a little bit earlier as well.
Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so basically the interesting thing is we ran a lot of, we built a lot of metrics to track engagement with all of the tabs that we had. And what was interesting is the tabs that we're most engaged with were at the top of the slider and the least engaged with were at the bottom of the slider. But what's really hard to determine is it the tab itself that people are drawn to? Like the contents in the top tabs, are they just better than the content at the bottom tabs? Or is it actually the order of the tabs? And so that is something that we have to test in the future. But it is a consideration in the way that we are restructuring Slider for future tests. So we're not launching it exactly how it was tested for a variety of reasons, including the data we collected that told us that some are performing better than others. So no, we're not launching it as it was tested.
Not exactly, but yeah.
Yeah, not exactly.
All right, next question is, Rachel, you talked about overlay a bit. How many tests do you have running at any given moment?
This is a good question, and it's kind of a two-parter. So we run as many as 8 or 9 tests at any one time if we're really ramping up velocity at some point for whatever reason. We have had probably 8 or 9 tests running at any one time, but not necessarily an overlay. So honestly, in talking about our research program, I have steered clear of overlay as much as possible because it's really hard to control. And actually it kind of has the benefit of a lot of site traffic where we can run a lot of tests at once. But we've started to grapple with the idea of overlay when we have tests on like smaller, like on fewer pages or on less trafficked pages. And at that point, that's really dependent on what pages a test is running on. So if you're running tests on a particular set of products, and you probably think that the other test that's run on a different subset of products, they have nothing to do with each other, you're probably pretty safe to run those in overlay and just account for the fact that, you know, a user may have seen both tests at the same time. And if I'm not mistaken, I think SiteSpec has a way to do that in their performance matrix. But so yeah, so that's a two-part question. We don't often run tests in overlay. At any given time, we probably run up to 8 tests, but normally we're at like 2 or 3 tests at one time.
Awesome, thank you. And then we need to wrap up in about a minute, but last question here is, Is this slider in production? If we go to ashleyfurniture.com, will we see it? And if not, when will we? What are the plans for that?
So it's not currently in production, as meaning like as it's been coded to our code base and now exists as a permanent feature on the site. We are doing a last and final 4th round of desktop testing and our first round of mobile testing, separate tests, but being launched at around the same time, just to have that data ready for business, even though we've already been approved for the coding of it and stakeholders are pretty much signed off. We are changing the tabs around slightly for this last iteration just to meet some business needs, such as one of our tabs is changing to be able to schedule an appointment online. That's a real big business feature. So we'll be adding that in this 4th variation. And then we actually combined the deals and price drop tabs into one, so that both of those same features are available. They're just under one tab, and that tab we are calling just deals, since price drop in itself is inherently a deal. So we put those together, and then the last thing we're doing is the trending tab that we talked about briefly before. There's an expectation from what we saw in our usability studies and just in talking to other people that they think inherently when you open the trending tab that there is a social media element to it, which they are not wrong in. And we worked with our social team to basically use some social elements inside that slide out to drive some more business to the featured products that are trending from a social media perspective with our team on there. So those 3 tabs are getting changed and then tested, and that's also the same tabs will be adjusted and made inside the mobile version. Once we get the data back on those and we report out to stakeholders, it'll be in IT probably that same week. So overall, you can expect to see it probably maybe at the very end of the year permanently out on the site.
We hope.
We hope.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to Matt and Rachel for joining us today, and thank you everyone for attending. Again, this will be up on YouTube soon. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks for having us,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Take care.